discussion at our new virtual What Cheer Writers Club. We're so glad you could make it. I'm Jody Vinson. I'm the program manager at the club. I'm joined with my colleagues, Jillian Winters, who just smiled, and Susanna Morse. So we want to just thank everyone for being here during this time. Even after closing the club's physical location downtown, it's been important for us to continue our mission as a nonprofit to support Rhode Island creatives through online events, through our virtual club on Slack, which is another platform we're using. If you're a member and haven't connected with us yet on Slack, check your email for a link to that. And if you're not a member, you can join at this time to be a part of that. We've got some guided work sprints for those of you working at home, where you can check in with other people, enjoy some creative conversation, writing prompts. We had our first virtual coffee chat on Friday where we got to see everyone's faces and talk about what we're working on. So we're just trying to keep this community going online, and thank you for being a part of it. Today, we wanted to bring together local writers and illustrators to talk about collaboration, specifically over publishing children's books. So to that end, we've invited local writer-illustrator team, Jamie Michalak. Jamie, you want to wave so people know there she is, yeah. And Kelly Murphy. Hi, Kelly, to join us. So Jamie and Kelly have been working on a forthcoming children's book, Dakota Crumb, Tiny Treasure Hunter, which will be out next year from Candlewick Press. Congrats on that project. I'm going to introduce them and read their bios, and then I'll give them the stage. I'll ask them a few questions and get the conversation going. We will have time for you to ask your own questions. We should be able to get a chat going on the side, yes, view on the right. So if you don't feel comfortable voicing your questions or your mic isn't working, feel free to write them in on the side and on the right, and I will read those questions. So everyone will be muted except for the three of us talking, but then during the Q&A, you can just raise your hand or make a note in the chat or give me a shout out, and we'll make sure you get your question answered. All right, so to introduce Jamie, she's a former children's book editor and author of more than 40 children's books. Her titles include Frank and Bean, illustrated by Bob Kohler, and the Joe and Sparky Early Reader series, illustrated by Frank Rimkiewicz.
Yes.
Not sure if I'm great. Thank you. And she also wrote the forthcoming books, Dakota Crumb, Tiny Treasure Hunter, illustrated by Kelly Murphy, and Nikki Nakayama, co-written by Debbie Michiko Florence and illustrated by Yuko Kato-Jones. In addition to her original titles, she's the author of numerous movie and TV show adaptations, such as the PBS Kids Martha Speaks chapter book series. And when not writing, Jamie can be found singing off-key, daydreaming, or hanging out with her two sons, who give her lots of ideas for stories. Jamie was born and raised in Springfield, Massachusetts. She now lives in Barrington, Rhode Island with her family. So you can find her at jamiemichalak.com. And thank you for being here, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.
Kelly Murphy is a New York Times bestselling author illustrator, recipient of the E.B. White Award. She's notably illustrated the works of Richard Peck, Dave Eggers, Jane Yolen, Jamie Michalak, as well as book covers for various Newbery Medal-winning novels. And she's creating award-winning art for clients around the world. Her 40-plus books have been translated into 15 languages, earning countless awards and starred reviews. Kelly teaches illustration at the Rhode Island School of Design here in Providence, is a keynote speaker, competition juror, and leads professional workshops nationwide. She lives in Providence with her husband, author-illustrator Antoine Ravoy, and their many animal companions who we may or may not hear during the course. I hope not. All right. Well, thank you both for being here. Jamie, I thought maybe you could start off by telling us about this forthcoming book and where the idea for it came from. And then Kelly, maybe you can explain how you two got connected over this project and how you approached it as an illustrator.
Sure. So Dakota Crumb, Tiny Treasure Hunter is a picture book about a secret museum within a museum. Specifically, it's a mouse hole museum and what I imagine to be under the Met in New York City. The mouse museum owner is named Dakota Crumb, and she's a bit like a mouse version of Indiana Jones. So by day, she's a mild-mannered curator of her mouse museum, but at night, she's in the Met and she's looking for treasures. And she's specifically looking for the purple jewel of Egypt, which is in her treasure map. And readers can look along with her because there's lots of little seek and find elements in the illustrations. So that's what the story is about. This story took probably about 6 or more years to write because it was one of those stories that I would work on and I would get stuck and I'd put it away and then I'd take it out again and get stuck, and it was just repeat for a few years because it originally started as what I imagined to be like an alphabet book of little tiny objects. I love anything miniature, so I imagine it as, it was called We A to Z, an Itty Bitty Alphabet, and I just pictured it like this beautiful concept book, but it was slate. And so then I fell on the idea of making these objects part of a mouse museum collection. And I pictured this treasure hunter mouse would curate her precious collection for the reader in a funny way and kind of explain the exotic places she traveled to find them, like the kitchen or the bedroom or wherever house she was in. And I still needed a conflict. So I went through lots of versions. Some were like completely bonkers. None of them worked. And then I saw this photograph and it sparked the idea, and I'll share it with you now. So, can you see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay. Okay, so this photograph, these were set up all over Sweden in 2016. There were these miniature mouse scenes, and it was created by a group of artists called Anonymouse, and you can find them on Instagram. And it really sparked my imagination. I wondered, you know, what if this was the mouse's museum? And what if it was under the Met, for example? And what if the mouse filled her museum with treasures she found in the Met, only the mouse's idea of treasure wasn't what the reader would expect. Like, it wasn't the Van Gogh masterpiece on the wall, but maybe a stamp on the floor that would be revealed with a page turn. So then the story really came together in a snap, which is when, you know, you finally have the right premise for your story. So once I had that premise, it just, everything clicked and I wrote it really quickly. So this is Kelly's beautiful art that it shows the Dakota Mouse's museum from the outside. And as an aside, I didn't realize till after I wrote the book that I think I was also influenced by this book. I don't know if anyone is familiar with it. It was published in '74. So kids of the 70s and 80s might know it, but Grover and the Everything in the Whole Wide World Museum was a book about this museum that had a tall hall and a carrot room that just had a carrot in it. And then it had the small hall, which was the coolest room of all. And I think it just always stuck with me. I wanted to live in this room. So I think that partly influenced the story without me even knowing it. So I'll walk you through just one page of the draft because I want to show you how art notes were important to this story, which is kind of in a, where the collaboration started. And so this is one page. First, Dakota must bravely slip past knights on horses, frightening faces, and ho-ho, what's that masterpiece on the wall? And I really needed an art note to explain where she was so that it would be like the reader would be seeing, you know, what you would think would be a masterpiece on the wall. And then when you go down, a beautiful painting, into the sack she goes, and I needed the art note to say, no, this is really a stamp. So there's lots of those visual clues in there. So for example, when she goes into the statuary on page 1415, she sees a long lost statue lurking in the corner, but I needed to have an art note that said action figure because it's actually like a small little treasure that she finds. So it's a challenging manuscript to illustrate for many reasons. The scale, I'm trying to stop my sharing. Stop sharing, okay. So the scale, there's like very big contrast in scale, the setting, the seek and find elements, and it really needed a top-notch talented illustrator to create the illustrations for this. So I was super thrilled when Candlewick had reached out to me and they said, we think Kelly Murphy would be the perfect illustrator for this. And I was already a big fan of her work. And I don't think they knew that I was also friends with Kelly because children's book world is really small, but also Rhode Island is really small. So it was exciting news all around. And Kelly can speak to how she was approached or worked with Candlewick when she saw the manuscript.
Yeah, do you want me to fill in at this point?
Sure, yeah, take it away.
Yeah, I'll be brutally honest how everything happened, so there's no mystery. But the great part is that I think Candlewick, I had worked with them in years in the past. I had done a few picture books with them in the past, but I haven't done picture books in probably like 5 years. So it's been a little bit since I got back into the picture book game. And Candlewick had contacted me to see if I was willing to part with a piece of artwork for, I think an editor or somebody who was retiring. And so they usually gift artwork. And so I said, yeah, of course I'd be honored, like, thank you so much for choosing my artwork. That'd be fantastic. But I also tried to leverage it a little bit. I tried to leverage it where it's like, oh, sure, but hey, you know what? I miss you guys. I really want to come in and show you some of my stuff. So it was a great opportunity to try and get back in front of them, to try and get, dip my toes back into the picture book world. And at that time, I was working on a lot of chapter books. In chapter books, in terms of illustration, it's usually black and white. And I think the fun part for chapter books about me is that the detail is a little bit more elaborate, the character descriptions or even the narratives that are happening. So I think my artwork took on a little bit more intricacy than I had done with them in the past for their picture books. So I was really excited to show some of my pen and ink work or some of my maps or more of the intricate stuff. So thank goodness they caught on to that. And then, a couple weeks had gone by and they showed Jamie's manuscript to me. And of course I'm going to do it, like, not only because Jamie's the best, but the fact that it was a treasure hunt and it had that intricacy that I really wanted to, it had that sort of mapping that I really wanted to do. So I was really excited to be taken in on the project. And at that point, I never know if the author is aware that I'm being considered as an illustrator, or, I never know the process. So it's really fun to be able to have these kind of meetings and chat with Jamie to see what point, they're aware that I'm being brought in on the project. I know sometimes there's a couple of illustrators that they consider. So I'm glad that it was just only me.
And that's first. Usually they do present 1 to 3, and yeah, but they were fully aligned.
Yeah, see, I never know. They just say, like, what do you think about this manuscript? And I like to pay my bills. And I'm usually all the projects, editors have a really great knack for matching up illustrators and authors, I think. They're really good at what they do in terms of that. But I'd love to kind of walk through a little bit of my pre-sketches so you guys can kind of see where I took the manuscript. And sometimes I think Jamie was talking about those art notes, and the art notes in this book were phenomenal. I needed them because if it was just the raw text, I think it would have been too open. I don't know exactly what you were thinking in terms of that miniature nature of it. I could assume because it's a mouse, but it was incredibly helpful. And I think, in fact, I pinged Jamie again to sort of like, wait, can you give me more? Can you give me more objects that could be small? But I'd love to go ahead and share my screen and show some of the early character designs, because I don't think Jamie's even seen these, so it's kind of fun to see.
I'm so excited.
Let me enter full screen. So these are the first. So when reading, I wasn't aware of the Grover book, which now I'm obsessed with. I'm super excited. I'm finding like used copies of it. But what I hearkened back to my childhood of Richard Scarry. Scarry?
Mm-hmm.
I never know which one it is. And Richard Scarry, who did Busy Town, I think I have an image. If you're not aware of it, I'll pop it up in front. But that sort of level of mapping and like the intricacy of like every time, you look at the page, you see something new. So I thought that maybe the characters should be like really basically shaped, like almost like, a simple triangle. I was thinking almost like a wedge of cheese.
Oh.
And I was thinking like almost like a Sherlock Holmes little hat and like, like a little frock or something. Yeah, so we can see that shape once again, because I knew that this little character was going to be running all over a museum. So we were going to be seeing Dakota really big or really small sometimes. So I wanted to make sure that, the reader could always find her somewhere. So I thought like, oh, a strong triangular shape might be really effective. And then I was like, maybe I'm getting hung up on the triangle shape. You can see I almost kind of have a little sketch in there of a triangle, but it turned into a jelly bean. Because I thought maybe it would be fun to like, you know, have a little hot dog character running around and her like awkwardness of trying to carry things. Just trying to think of a little bit of comedy. And then this one, which is, if you know Richard Scarry's work, it's totally a ripoff. I couldn't get him out of my head. But I was thinking of, you know, a little bit more anthropomorphication, a little bit more connection to the human element, because she's really active. Like she's swinging and she's dashing and she's belly crawling. So she had to have a little bit of action to her. And then I was also thinking about like the cliche, like I didn't want it to just be Indiana Jones or something like that. I was trying to think of like, well, what would a cool museum curator, I don't know, like a treasure hunter look like? And so then this is where I was starting to get legs with who Dakota really was. You know, she kind of has the cool little army shirt and stuff like that. And so these are the sketches that I was showing the publisher, and they honed in on these sketches in particular. So that was good to help me focus. And she had like a little utility belt, and nobody uses these things. Like, you know, like doctors, you always see the reflectors on doctors' things, but nobody. Cartoons did it to me. And if you're not familiar, I'm gonna switch over. If you're not familiar with, sorry, I'm gonna show you with Richard Scarry's work. This is some of Richard Scarry's stuff. And it's sort of like the way things work, and it has the intricacy of like, you know, the bakery down below. And this is the sort of stuff that I was really inspired by. And I have to keep it around as I'm drawing, because sometimes you get so locked into the words and you're afraid to venture beyond the words. So I try to keep these open while I'm working. Is it okay if I show the dummy at this point? Is that all right?
With me? Yeah. Oh, go for it.
Sorry, I'm kind of fumbling through here. View. How do I view?
I don't know if I mentioned while you're doing that, I usually don't try to include art notes, so it leaves more creative freedom for the illustrator because they're co-creating the books. So I don't know if I mentioned that, but that's also something. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
Art notes are, I never mind them. You know, I never mind them because it just gives me a better insight to what the author was thinking about. So then I can go down a research path. Sometimes, you know, when it's later in the conversation or it's later in the dummy, and then all these art notes start coming back, and it's like, well, where were you like 3 months ago? No. And sometimes I get insecure because it's like, oh, is it because they hate my artwork and that's why they're chiming in now? Or maybe that's when they were invited into seeing the artwork and they never saw it before. But more often than not, I don't mind. And in this particular case, the art notes were incredibly helpful. So it's a 32-page picture book, which means that it's actually, other people talk about this better than me. So it starts on a single page, which is this one, and it ends on a single page. And I went through a few different versions, but this is the final version that we kind of came up with. The earlier versions had more of a dive into the city, because the way that Jamie sets up the text, it kind of sets up like, you know, in the big city, you know, there, you know what I mean? Like you'll see the words here. But I really like that sort of like starting with the macro and then like really zooming into going into the tiny little mouse herself. Yeah, but it's really fun because there's like a little bit of mystery when you first meet her, and she's going to be completely in silhouette. If you want to read, I'm a terrible reader, so I'll let you guys read it.
I don't think is it showing up for everyone else? I'm still seeing the character sketches.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Is it just me?
Oh no. Wait, can you guys, let me stop share. Oops, not annotate. Let me stop share and then I can share again maybe?
Okay.
Strange, okay. Thank you for letting me know, because otherwise I would have just been rambling. Any better?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Maybe it's when I went to full screen, so I'll show full screen. Does everybody see it now?
Yep.
So see, okay. So there's the first page, kind of an introduction. Here's a sort of city. Yeah, she's going to be really in silhouette because you don't really get to see Dakota until probably like spread 3. You kind of get a sense of following the Family Circle was one of the comics that I used to read. I know it's so lame, it's so wholesome, but I loved it when you would see like the little footprints, and I was like, oh, I'm going to include that. And all of the paintings are going to have things hidden in them, and they're all kind of looking at Dakota scurrying across the floor. And then this is when we finally get to see her. And she always has this map, and it's really hard because Jamie set me up with a challenge because she's got a sack, she's got her utility belt, she's got she's got lasso, and she also has her map. So it's almost like an Inspector Gadget kind of thing. And I knew the words were talking about the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, but I had a conversation with the publisher, and I said, "Are we allowed to do that?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're gonna try not. We're gonna try not to do that." So I had to kind of shift some of the great part about the Metropolitan, if you ever visit their website, is that they have 3D tours of each room. So that was super helpful to kind of get a sense for what some of the objects could be in the museum.
Sorry to interrupt, Kelly. And well, aside, that's happening, I think, a lot more for a lot of museums now. They're getting a lot of virtual visitors. But we're not moving through, I don't know if you're paging through the manuscript right now. We're still on page 1 with you.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry, guys. Let me stop share again and I'll share. And I'm not going to go to full screen. I'm so sorry. I'm a noob. Here we go. It must be, something must be happening when I'm going to full screen, but you can see it now, right? So let me go back.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
We can see now, and I just want to take a moment to make sure everyone in the audience is still with us and doing okay. Is there anyone who's having any technical difficulties? Okay, I think we're good. All right, sorry about that, Kelly, go ahead.
No, sorry, I'm just yammering. So yeah, here's the setup. Here's that sort of family circle. I want to have a sort of a path that people can trace. The age group, and Jamie can chime in here, but I've been told that it's like 3 to 7. And 3 to 7, that's a pretty big, that's a pretty big jump in my mind. You know, what a 3-year-old can catch on to and see is a lot different than what a 7-year-old. So I think some of the hidden object or some of the tracing objects will be, I don't know, there'll be a wide range of things. So yeah, a lot of it was based on the Met. Let me just keep going through. Here's the little action figure. Yeah, there's, I forget the name of the temple in the Metropolitan, but it's a beautiful room. And I had like the water, and they're like, no, we can't do the water. So I had to kind of piecemeal things together. And trying to figure out, like Indiana Jones, X never marks the spot, but X did mark the spot. And I was trying to think like, yeah, maybe it could be within the hieroglyphs of the carvings. That's Lower Egypt. And the dummy right now, and I think it's, you know, because I'm still making the artwork and I can talk really, really quickly about that. It's still pretty open in terms of detail and intricacy that I was talking about, because I needed to at least have a map of where things could go. And what I would like to do, which is different than some of my other artwork, because I work pretty traditionally, is that I'm going to be doing these digitally so that we have maximum movement of where those objects are going to go, and we can scale them up and scale them down. And then this is her own mouse hole museum, which was definitely the most fun.
I love it.
Yeah, and it's all blobulous right now. And so this will be, and this will get, it was fun because when Jamie and I kind of chit-chatted about this meeting, we talked about this page, and it's like, yeah, you know, we got to cram more in there. We could rework this, and it'll get reworked. But and then that's sort of the end at the end for page 32. And that's the dummy. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much for being willing to give us that sneak peek into this book. Probably have a lot of readers in our audience when it does come out. So intriguing to see into your process. I was particularly surprised to learn how siloed you were. That I assumed that writers or illustrators would be in direct contact with each other, and I assumed when I reached out to both of you that you had found each other since you were both in Rhode Island. So that was fascinating to hear about how the publisher kind of matches you up. I wonder, just considering our audience, if you could step us through that acquisition process and kind of the time frame for it, how that worked, like emails once you were assigned to it, negotiations, contracts, and then like how this back and forth plays out. Is it mediated through the publisher, or are you guys in direct contact?
Mm-hmm. Would you like me to speak about the manuscript first and then go to the art?
Sounds good.
Okay. So prior to signing up a manuscript, an editor might ask for a revision or two. And then if the editor feels like the manuscript's ready to sign up, the process varies after that from publisher to publisher. So some editors might have to take it to what's called an acquisition meeting, and a pub committee decides if that manuscript gets signed up or not. I'm fortunate with Candlewick where they don't have that meeting. So basically if my editor, Joan Powers, if she wants to sign it up, that's her prerogative. She doesn't have to jump through any hoops. And then after that, there'll be a contract negotiation either with the author or the agent. And the whole process can take 3 months if you're lucky. It takes a long time. So usually like 3 to 4 months.
Well, thank you. And Kelly, how do you know if that manuscript is right for you? And how much say, like Jamie, could you have been like, no, let's look for someone else? Like, how much control do both of you have over your choice in the project?
My choice is sort of like what they present me. And the choice comes into, if you have titles that you're working on. And for me, I kind of know my process now, just working for a couple of years. I kind of know how long a book is going to take me. So if I'm already working on X amount of books beforehand, I have to have a very real, honest conversation with them if they're looking to put it on a list for next year. So say if they approach me today and they're like, yeah, we're looking to have this published by fall of 2021, it's just not possible. I know I just wouldn't be able to do it just because I'm a snail. So usually it all depends what the author is doing with their releases as well too, and what the publishing house is doing, and whether or not they can push things back on different lists. And there have been some projects that I've missed out on because I can't do it in their time frame, and that's a big bummer because the project is great, but the timing doesn't work out. But more often than not, for me, it's all about deadline and whether or not I can make their book lists. And the decision is, artistically, what would you like to do? And I like a full range of things. I never want to limit myself too much. Usually sentimental stories aren't they're not too much in my wheelhouse. So I kind of like the more adventurous ones. I like the sort of like ambiguous stories a little bit more, where I can kind of throw some of my stuff in there. But
yeah, fascinating to see your kind of back and forth with the art notes and how you are able to communicate even if you're not directly in touch with the illustrator. Do you have any like pet peeves about working with illustrators, anything that or about with writers, anything you don't want to hear from them, or is it usually a relatively smooth process?
For me it's usually pretty smooth. Oh gosh, I'll be really honest.
Go for it.
I know people are gonna think I'm a demon. Sometimes it's frustrating that I can't have a one-on-one with the author, because I feel like they're just going to be able to tell me what they're thinking. And authors are incredibly generous because they typically know that the illustrator has a whole other vision, and it's meant for them to have another vision. But when I get cranky, it's a little bit when I get feedback from either designer or even an editor, and I don't know exactly, they're not filtering it right or they're not writing it correctly, because sometimes you'll hear language where it's like, well, I think, and they make you do changes, you do those changes, and then you hear something different the next week. And it's sort of like, were you just saying this, or was the author and the editor and everybody involved, giving feedback? That's when I start to feel, gosh, it sounds so whiny. It's when I start to feel a little abused, you know what I mean? It's sort of like, guys, have a meeting, have a consensus, like, talk to the author and then get back to me. And it's not that I'm being cranky about making changes. No, I mean, changes make the book better, but I'm being more efficient instead of like running off doing my little task and then showing it and they're like, no, that's not what we wanted. And it's like, oh. So I think having a really great designer, editor, art director, whoever you're in contact with in terms of art, somebody who's very efficient and knows how to use the right language in order to just make those corrections and those adaptations more fluid. I don't know how it is on the author end.
Yeah, I was going to say on the author end, I mean, imagine when it goes really well, Jamie, that for you, it's just like magical to see your words illustrated, to kind of see the story come to life. It must be a very satisfying collaboration for you both when it goes well. But anything on your end that maybe illustrators should be aware of in this kind of collaboration process?
I agree with Kelly that I wish there was more direct collaboration. Like I loved her illustrations, and even just emailing her to tell her, I felt like I was breaking a rule. So just to explain a little bit how the publishers do it, at least in my experience, the they'll send you some illustrators and you get approval of the illustrator choice. But it's ultimately like, I leave it up to them because they're the professionals. And then you'll get, when sketches are pretty tight, they'll send you sketches for your input. But I really just try to keep that to like factual comments, like not, I don't like this color, or, you know, not that would happen in sketches, but just to keep them very objective. And as far as pet peeves, I've had such a wonderful experience with illustrators. Like that's my favorite part is to see what an illustrator brings to the story and how they might have details that I didn't even think of. So that is like the magical part of it. I'll think about that pet peeve part. I can't think of any right now.
Negative question.
Although, like, it does take, I guess one, and this is of no fault of their own, is that when you have sequels, like a series, and the books come out really far apart because that illustrator is so busy, that's like, oh God, those kids are already grown up by the time they get the next book. But again, no fault of their own, so
there can be some, I'm sure, some wait times and some frustrating gaps in the process because of how many people are involved. Yeah.
Or just the illustrator schedule because they're so booked up, like Kelly said.
Yeah. And Kelly, I know that sometimes illustrators spend a lot, maybe even more time with the manuscript than the author. Are you ever tempted, probably maybe not in this case, but are you ever tempted to like rewrite part of a story, or are you inspired to kind of write ever on your own, or write your own story?
God, no. It's like, who am I? You know, the sort of Irish Catholic background is like, who are you to think that you can write a story? No, I mean, sometimes there have been maybe one or two instances where like I keep hitting a roadblock, and that's only happened like with my last couple of books, where I keep kind of hitting a roadblock and I keep asking the editor, like, does this make sense? Because the visuals might be a little different than what the words are saying. And I think in picture books, language doesn't have to be exactly representational with what the images are. You know, I mean, like there's a poetry and there's an art form to the words, and then how the images are working together. It doesn't have to be diagrams, you know, of what the text is saying. So I always check in with the editor to make sure that things are okay. The odd thing is that sometimes like I'll do the art and I'll do the dummy, and then, you know, you get the revised dummy with a full layout so I can kind of use them as I go to finish. And then I see like small little text change and I'm like, oh, why'd they change it? Like, why'd they change? No, don't change that. So sometimes I think, you know, because the book is still being edited, it's even in the writing aspect of it. And it's not huge story changing elements, but it might be just a different way to kind of match up with what the visuals are. And I really appreciate that. It's something that I never want to force or suggest. I like being in my illustrator realm and using the tools that I need, and then relying on the author with what their tools are. So very rarely will I ever say like, can you change that? Who am I to think? Who am I to do that?
Honestly though, I would love that kind of feedback from an illustrator because they spend so much more time with the story. So they're probably seeing things that I'm not seeing sometimes. So it could be less siloed, in my opinion.
Maybe I'll
an interesting idea. I just have two more questions I want to pose to both of you, and then I will open it up to everyone else. One is just, would you mind speaking to kind of how you balance work, family, social life with your creative process? I think that'd be good for all of us to hear.
Go for it, Jamie.
What do you want me to, oh God, I don't balance those very well. I have a 9-to-5 job and I have 2 teenage boys. So writing is really hard for me to fit in lately. So I do a lot of binge writing. So I'll do like a lot of my pre-writing right before I go to bed, just like notes and stuff. And then I need to like go to an Airbnb or just get away and get out of my house for a day or two. And then I just write around the clock, and that works for me. I mean, it's unusual, but it's just really hard to fit everything in.
Wow, that's a lot.
I love the writing around the clock. It sounds grueling, but for me, it's like all that pent up creativity that I don't get to use. I can finally just, you know, I'm energized by that.
This is why I love these opportunities to talk to authors, because it's like, whoa, that's so not like me.
I'm hoping it won't always be this way, but right now, this is the only way I can make it work.
I find like the more books that I'm doing, I need more time to marinate. And I don't know if it's because I have a little bit more time. I have no idea, but I need a lot of time to kind of do a lot of reference searching, or, you know, even the sketch process for character design. I really kind of just need time, like I need a lot of time. So I illustrate this, it's my full-time job. I teach part-time at RISD. And in fact, this semester, because I knew I was going to be working on Jamie's book and another picture book I finished earlier, it's the first semester I've taken off in about 12 years. It turned out to be an okay semester to take off, unfortunately. Yeah, so this was the first time where I knew I had to dedicate, because I knew I had 2 picture books, and that's a lot. It's a lot for me. There is no social life, really. This is kind of like talking to you guys is my social life. But I don't complain, because it's I don't know, it sounds really corny, but like all the characters and all the stories that I get to read, it's sort of the stuff that I live for. And obviously if I get to go and talk to the students, that's really helpful. The other aspect that's hard about a career in creative, you know, being a creative career, is sort of like managing the professional business side. So you have something that's, I don't know, emotional, or something that's instinctual, and something that you're nurturing, and then you have something where you have to kind of talk hard about taxes, and talk hard about self-promotion, and talk hard about, yeah, what are we going to do for promotion during a book, during a national lockdown? And those things are sort of hard to change the brain a little bit. And, you know, I try to think of it as two masks that I wear, and it's okay to be very different from each other. And at least that's how I cope a little bit with it. Yeah, so some of that can be tricky, and it's I don't know, just doing it, I don't know, makes you kind of, I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's hard.
Yes, and that's what a lot of us, I think, can relate to that. And I did want to ask you both about what you alluded to, Kelly, creating during this time of the coronavirus. I know we had a conversation with about 15 writers yesterday at our coffee chat, just hearing from people how their creative process was affected. And it was very different for different people. So we were curious to hear how it might be affecting your creativity and creative inspiration, where you're looking for inspiration. And then again, maybe if you can address the business side of it, will this project be affected by this? And how do you see authors coping with it now? If you each want to address that as you're comfortable, we'd love to hear.
I'm hoping this book won't be affected because it's 2021, but it is, yeah, it's a stressful time. It's easy to get distracted, and it's hard to think creatively. I think one of the silver linings is that life has slowed down a lot. So there's more time for reflection and getting organized, and but yeah, it's unusual, and it's been a little bit stressful.
I was relieved, because I read a tweet from a past student of mine from like 2 or 3 years ago, and she tweeted, she's like, oh my gosh, everybody else is coming up with these creative ways and having drawing sessions, and, you know, having like, let's share, let's Zoom, let's do all this stuff. And she's like, I can't deal with that. Yeah. And I thanked her. I said, oh my God, thank you so much for writing this, because I work at home. I'm a hermit. I stay at home all the time. This is my operating norm, but I was so unnerved, you know, with everything that was going on around, you know, and concern for loved ones and concern for everybody, that I just kind of stopped working. And you know, it took sort of this like younger alumni to kind of say like, okay, all right, that's a total normal reaction. Thank you. So it took me a little bit of time to kind of regroup and refocus on what I was looking at or being absorbed while I was working. Because if you're watching any news and watching number counts, you know, it becomes this horrible, you know, obsessive thing, and suddenly you're thinking about something else, but you're trying to concentrate on that. The other thing that I kind of, when the whole ebook craze came around, you know, and publishing was freaking out, like books are dead, print is gone, I calmed myself a little bit with that, like, no, people are always going to need stories. They're always going to need a physical book. It's about sharing, you know, even serious subject matter can be conveyed in these books. So any kind of future worry that I have, I try to calm it down and relax and say like, no, families and especially young readers are always going to need the vehicle of the book, you know, and the vehicle of metaphor through story to kind of, I don't know, either escape, explain, or entertain. And I think as long as we're ready to adapt, you know, as long as we're ready to, you know, respond in that way, we'll be okay. I hope.
Thank you. Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you, both of you, for sharing those and answering my questions. I do want to make sure everyone else has a chance to answer their questions. For those of you I can see, you can wave if you have a question, raise a hand, or feel free to unmute and shout out. And Kelly and Jamie would be happy to answer any questions.
I almost want to pick your brain on just the whole process, but maybe from a very beginning point, because you guys are obviously both really established. And I'm curious if this book was happening more when you were starting out, what would be some differences about how you might approach it? Yeah, what did you learn from the process of being started in this? What would you maybe have done different if this book was part of one of the first ones that you were working on?
I know what I would have done different. So my dummy, which I showed you guys, in my mind, that dummy is really loose. Because I'd already worked with the designer and I'd already worked with the art director, I had shown some samples of artwork that was already going to look like, and they, you know what I mean? They kind of can trust me. I hate to say that word because it sounds like they're distrustful, but they're not, but they could trust me. So my dummy was incredibly loose. Like you can see, I didn't draw any of the details. I didn't draw still to this moment, I don't know where all of those objects are going to go. So I took the liberty of them having a relationship with me. Whereas if I was first starting out, I would probably have delineated everything just so that they would know, there would be no questioning, and there would be that big, huge sense of trust. It's a big time killer, you know what I mean? To figure out everything in that dummy stage. And also if you go from a sketch to a finish, it can be crushing too, where you're like, I already did this in the sketch. I drew everything. There's no fun of figuring things out as you're going along. So I know that's something I definitely would have done in the beginning just to kind of build up that trust. And it's also a way for me to also not allow anybody else in. So I was being kind of defensive. And it's like, well, everything's here, you know what I mean? It's perfect. Nobody's going to have any feedback because it's all there, which is kind of lame. I've kind of relaxed a little bit about that, where it is collaborative. And I can let them in. So I know I've gotten much looser with my sketches.
Me? Oh, okay. I would say I'd probably make it a lot longer. So picture books usually try to shoot for at least 500 words, or not at the max 500 words or under. So this text is as spare as I could possibly make it. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned in the past, even in just the past couple of years, is to not give up on a story. So this story really did take 6 years or more, 1 million rounds, all different iterations. And I just didn't want to give up on it when you have that kernel of something you believe in. And that happened with another story that just got signed up recently that hasn't been announced yet, where it was something else that I just kept going back to. I couldn't make it work. And then it was one little thing that sparked an idea that made the whole concept click. So that was a big lesson for me. I think I gave up on stories way too quickly because it just wasn't working and I would get frustrated. And now you could put them away, but take them back out if you really believe in them.
I have a question. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I just wasn't sure. When you were starting out, did you go directly through a publisher, or did you seek to find your own illustrator and publish yourself? And do you think one avenue is better than the other for somebody who's never had a children's book published?
I'll let Jamie start with that one.
It broke up a little bit. Were you asking, should you go straight to the publisher or?
Yeah, I said when you were starting out, did you go directly through a publisher, or did you try to publish yourself? And which avenue would you recommend for somebody who doesn't have, I mean, you obviously have published many books at this time, at this point. Suppose this is your first.
Right. I sent mine out to different publishers and received a lot of rejection letters before I connected with an editor that I've now been working with for more than 15 years. So once you get that first one in the door, that definitely helps. But I don't have any experience with self-publishing I don't have any opinions one way or the other with that. I don't know. I don't have enough experience with that.
I have lots of opinions about that.
Okay, good. Go.
I sound so mean. If you author and illustrate, so if you can do both, I think your voyage can be a little bit quicker. If you're just illustrating, you can send out samples, you can do that, but sometimes they might like your stuff for years and then they don't quite have the story to match you up with. So there's been some people who have reached out to me, they're like, we've loved your stuff for 7 years, you know, like we finally found a story for it. I'm like, why didn't you tell me you were looking? And for me, my suggestion is if you're an author and you're trying to write, how do I say this in the kindest way? I think it's more worth your effort to reach out to publishers, to reach out to agents. I think it's more worth your effort to do that rather than trying to find an illustrator who may match your style, if you can afford them, if they, you know what I mean? Because there's a lot of time and effort, as you guys were mentioning before. It can sometimes take me 6 months to a year to work on these things, and there's no promise, because if you're just working with the author who doesn't quite have the publisher yet, it's all risk at that point. And then also thinking about, if you are self-publishing, then who's printing, who's designing, who's shipping it, who's going to be trying to put it in front of librarians, who's going to try and put it in front of book reviewers, who's going to be, it can be really, really limiting. But if you were thinking about it on a much smaller level, then sure, go for it. You know, there's a lot of small presses out there. There's a lot of different small book expos and things like that, especially in the comic industry. But I think the best effort is to try and have a conversation with the publishers, especially when you're first starting out, because I don't know if you have everything in your wheelhouse in order to make that story a success. And I think being able to collaborate with a publisher, and the best part about publishing is that there's so many different I mean, there's hundreds upon hundreds, at least here in North America, that have a very specific thing that they're looking for. There's some publishing houses that I get along with. I get along with everybody, you know what I mean? But like what their sentiments and what they want to do with their books are similar to mine. And then there's some that aren't, you know, it's kind of like, all right, I can move on from them. But I would try and reach out to editors, and if you're an illustrator, reaching out to art directors, because they also have a say in bringing things to the table too. I don't know if that helps or hurts, but the self-publishing industry it takes a lot. It takes a lot to kind of put a book together. And unless you're ready and you've had a little experience doing that, I would say don't. I'm so mean.
And if you're from, I don't know if you're familiar with SCBWI, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. It's an excellent resource. They have a conference every year. This one, unfortunately, was canceled this year, but they have it every May for New England in Springfield. And it's a great way to connect with editors, designers, other authors. There's lots of workshops and different events throughout the year. So that's a good way to connect as well.
Can you just repeat Society of Children's?
Yep, it's SCBWI, and it stands for Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators.
Okay, thank you.
I think one of our club members, Jeanette Bradley, is involved with them. So
yeah,
connect you with her, Deborah, if you want to reach out after the event.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
And they it's all levels of people, from people just beginning to people who've been in business forever.
Right, all levels. And it's great because you almost like grow up with some of them too. Like if you're just starting out, you kind of, you know, like you start to talk to those who are just starting out as well. And I've seen generations, you know, like being raised up together, and it's really fun.
Good, thank you. I appreciate the input.
Just to clarify, Jamie and Kelly, when you're talking about reaching out to publishers or art directors or editors, is that something you recommend doing as individual creatives, or would you recommend the agent kind of as a middle person?
If the house is open to unsolicited manuscripts, you could submit it directly. If not, you have to go through an agent. Whether or not to get an agent, that's always like a chicken and egg question. Like, do you have to wait until you have enough to show them, or just, you know, if you see somebody, that's another place for SCBWI to come in handy, is because there's lots of agents there as well that you could meet and get a sense of their sensibility.
As an illustrator, we have an easier task of getting our work in front of somebody. You know, if you send a sample, like a postcard sample, and you send it to an editor or an art director, it takes a millisecond for them to decide whether they like it or not. It's not sort of like, oh, let me open this email. Okay, let me dedicate time to reading the story. Let me do this. So I tell my students, or I tell illustrators who are just starting out, forget, send your stuff, because you know what I mean? Like, they're not going to look at somebody, this is beautiful, this would work well with this story. And then if they find that they don't have an agent, they're not going to say like, oh, well, forget them. You know, they'll reach out to you regardless. So I am unagented, and I have been unagented for almost my whole entire career. And I've found ways around it. And like, once again, if you author illustrate, you know what I mean? Like, if you have that full dummy, you know, it's on their desk, they're more prone to open through it and take a look through it. So I think if you're an illustrator, you can bob and weave around the agent. And I feel weird sometimes, because I've seen some people try and impress agents all the time. And it's like, send it to a publisher, see what a publisher says. You never know, you know, like, don't just rely on the agent solely. You know, if a publishing house is open to receiving things, hey, you never know, maybe they'll like it and they'll work directly with you for future stuff as well.
And you have the benefit of being able to showcase your work online or via social media, where authors don't have that luxury.
No, no, it's different. You know, it's really, really different. So.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Actually ask a follow-up question about sort of if you're presenting yourself, I assume whenever you're going to contact a publisher, you need to have a full manuscript ready for them to review.
With picture books, you should have the full manuscript ready, or any shorter work. With novels, you'll send a synopsis and maybe a first chapter, or even just a cover letter, and then they'll tell you if they want to see the whole manuscript or not.
Okay. And that was, I guess, with like the picture book, I was curious, how helpful is it, again, to get someone to actually read it, to have like in like an email a good pitch, a good synopsis, even if the picture book is fairly short? Does that really help if you have a very simple?
There's mixed opinions on that. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. There's mixed opinions. Some editors want to get right to the story. When I was an editor, I liked the cover letters. It was almost like a trailer of a movie to like get me in the mood and make me know like a little bit about what the story was about. I think it couldn't hurt to have a good pitch.
Okay. Yeah.
As long as it's short.
Right. Not too detailed.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's the same with graphic novels, the same as like a novel. Like, if you have the first chapter or the first like 10 pages drawn out, and then you have like just the synopsis, then that's a similar thing for graphic novels as well.
Thank you. Donna, did you have a question? Oh, Donna, you're on mute. Could you unmute it? There you go.
No, I did not. Oh.
Oh, sorry. You are muted now. Can you try again?
How's that?
I can hear you now.
Okay. I just wanted to make a comment. I find this totally fascinating, and I'm so glad I joined What Cheer just about an hour ago.
Oh.
I've been familiar with your organization for the past year, but I've just been thinking about it, and with the shut-in practices going on this week, I thought it'd be a great idea to join up. But I find all of your comments totally fascinating and really educational. I think it's been great to see everybody. I work for the Blackstone Valley Tourism Council in Pawtucket, and I'm very interested in the Aloof Carousel at Slater Park, and I have an idea of a story. And I was asked about 5 or 7 years ago to work with the Mattel and the American Girl books. Totally out of the blue, they wrote me an email at my office, because we do train trips at the Tourism Council, Polar Express train trips and trips to Putnam, Connecticut. And they wanted to have an American Girl Doll of the Year. Grace Thomas, the Doll of the Year for 2015. They wanted her to go on a train trip on her birthday and meet a lady who served cookies on the train. And then the end storyline was, it was a 3-part series and a movie. And I was asked to work on it, and totally out of the blue, which I thought was fascinating. And the last book of the series, she went on a Polar Express type train. And I'm pretty friendly with Chris von Allsburg when he lived in Providence. And my husband and I go visit him every year at his new home in Beverly Farms. And he autographs hundreds of books for us all the time. And we raffle them off and sell them at our Polar Express train trip. And we've done it for 21 years now. But I was drawn into this, and I thought it was very exciting to be asked to be a part of it. and I was one of the consultants because I started with the train trips, and I was very familiar with the Polar Express story. And of course, it was a Polar Express type of trip. They didn't use that name, but it was an interesting process, I thought. And they sent me, you know, chapters every couple of days, and I would edit them and give some feedback. And the author was from the state of Washington, I think. So she didn't know very much about the Blackstone Valley. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I've always had this idea about the Slater Pot Carousel because it's 125 years old this year. And it was built by Charles Loof, the same gentleman who did the present pot carousel. And it was almost going to be torn down and demolished in the 1970s. But the children of the city were encouraged to go out into the city and have the neighbors sign a petition. And literally 10 minutes before the silent bid auction was going to be held and they were going to it to be demolished, the mayor was served. And he saw thousands of petitions signed. And he said, well, I guess we have a problem. We're not going to sell the horses for $10 or $20 a piece, and we're not going to demolish the carousel. And I live a stone's throw from the carousel, actually, in Pawtucket. And my children were brought up there, and so was I. And I just thought it was an interesting story. So I've been doing a lot of research, and so I just find this fascinating. I really do. Thank you very much for having us here and hosting it.
Thank you, Donna. It's fun to see where the seeds of inspiration from these stories from Jamie's. It comes from various places, from the children's books you've read, but also from the world around you. Jamie, have you worked on like nonfiction stories, kind of like what Donna is talking about, where you would research a story that has happened maybe in your location or historically, or do you stick more with like fiction and what comes to you?
I just wrote my first nonfiction picture book with Debbie Michiko Florence called Nikki Nakayama, A Chef's Tale in 13 Bites, and it's about a chef in California who's the first female chef to make this cuisine called keiseki. And so yeah, it was a lot of research. I got to go out and visit a restaurant and interview her, and anything that you feel passionate about is just such wonderful material, and anything you're curious about. So yeah, I did a lot of research and then wrote that with another author. So that's coming out in 2022.
Awesome. Thank you. We probably have time for like one or two more questions. I just want to make sure everyone has a chance. Is there someone else who has a question? Okay, just wave at me or shout out. Do you have another one? Go ahead.
Sorry, I feel like I'm asking so many questions, but with Donna and actually you asking about some of the nonfiction, these picture books, it ties into some of the stuff I'm interested in or curious about, and it actually got me back to what you guys were talking about with using the idea of the Met, but not using the Met. And some of the stuff that I have been thinking about or interested in is sort of running based and sort of related to marathons. And I'm wondering, like, would it just depend on like the publisher or the editor, if you want to incorporate something that's like an established event that you would be referencing in the book, and you might need, I mean, I'm assuming you would need their approval to be able to reference that, you know, like again, like a specific marathon or series of marathons. I don't know if that's it beyond.
No, it's a very valid question. I would say don't shy away from it. You know what I mean? I think the thing is like, oh, I'll shy away with it because it's going to be a pain to try and talk to you. You know, you know, if it's a Boston Marathon Association, like, oh, that's going to be a nightmare. They're going to ask for proceeds. But I would say do it. You know, I think reaching out to organizations where they have a different way of reaching their audience, I think they would be excited. And then that's another reason to potentially work with publishers, because then they have the legal team behind them to help you out with that.
Right.
Whether it's a person or an organization. But I would say, yeah, write it if that's what you're interested in. And then, you know, like contact them and see what you need to do in order. Yeah. I think doing it the other way around, you know what I mean? Like it might cheapen what you wanted to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
You may have to, like, I don't know, there may be something legally that you might have to do, whether they're taking a cut or whether it's just permissions or whether they're putting a logo on the book. You know, all of those are up for discussion. And I think, especially in this day and age where different medias are being explored, I would say go for it.
That's my hope. And I'm fortunate that I actually know people in the Boston Marathon organization and probably New York, but if it got to more global, it would be potentially and again, I know them personally. I have no idea how much that's actually going to help me in any sort of like legal situation.
There's a lot of different publishers who will try and organize this information too. And forgive me, I'm not remembering any of them right now. Of course I'm not. Whereas, you know, like it could be a slight nonfiction, or like a not historical fiction, but it could be fiction but with nonfiction. And it could be a study of all different marathons across the globe, like the history of marathons.
Yeah.
And they give you a science team, they'll give you a research team, they'll give you people that you can like throw ideas off of. And that's why working with publishers is, you know, sometimes I whine about them and they're like, darn publishers, but like, no, they're great. They're, you know, they have the team and they have the resources and they're willing to help. So.
Okay. Oh, I think.
Yeah. Nonfiction books are crazy. There's so much work that goes
There's
into
so much work. I know. I had no idea until I started the research thing. You don't want to make any errors, so you over research.
Yeah.
I see that Deborah has to leave. Deborah, thank you for being with us. And we're going to be wrapping up here in just a minute, but thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you for doing it, to all of you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for
Enjoy it.
joining.
Great. All right. I'm going to ask one last question. If there's anyone else who I'm not seeing, go ahead and you can tap your picture to unmute and let me know. Okay, great. Just wanted to ask if you have any last words of advice for writer or illustrator seeking a collaboration partner right now, or a publisher for their project, or any last words of advice during this interesting time we all find ourselves in, before we sign off here.
As far as looking for a publisher, in addition to the SCBWI events, I just reading everything that's out there right now. And if you find something that clicks with your sensibility, just take a look at the spine, see who the publisher is, do some research. Maybe you could find the editor of that book that aligns with your taste. So, but most importantly, just reading what's out there, not what you grew up with, but everything as much as you can, because it's such a different world from the picture books that we grew up, or I grew up with. And also to start building that network now. Children's book world is so supportive, and we love to cheer other authors and illustrators on. So whatever you're comfortable with on social media, could be, you know, just pick one platform and, you know, be authentic and support your other authors and illustrators, and especially like your local bookstore who might need some boosting right now, and starting to build that network that you might need later when you're ready to celebrate and promote your book.
Yeah, I'm going to champion what you said, Jamie. Being within the arts, I think if you're a writer or illustrator, you kind of, I'm making assumptions, but you know, sometimes you may have a sensitive side, or you might be introverted. I'm introverted, so realizing that there is a network for you, and there are other people who want to help and support, whether it's even just sort of like, keep doing it, you know, even just somebody saying keep doing it, or even just saying, hey, I have a connection to this publisher, check them out, send it directly to them. You know, like they're really willing to help. And, you know, I go always for the cheesy sentiment, but especially in times like now, things feel superficial. You know, I have family members who are nurses and they're in the medical industry, and I'm sitting here being like, well, I'm drawing chipmunks today, you know, like, it's like, but I think what we do is important. So trying to find meaning within that, to not be discouraged, and to fulfill what you're trying to do. And I wasn't able to jump into this right away. You know, it took me several years of sending stuff out and improving, and what Jamie said, like looking and reading and absorbing. So if you keep up with it, and if you're willing to receive and read and adapt, you know, I think it's a pretty fulfilling career where you can balance both, you know, your personal goals, but then also something that's a little bit bigger and reaching out to an audience, which is pretty important.
Mm-hmm. And I'll add to the cheesy and say, not that you said anything cheesy, just that you said you were going to, but just to celebrate all of the moments along the way. I think we're always like waiting for this one big moment, and we miss all the things we could have been celebrating along the journey. I hate that word, but just to celebrate things that you do along the way is important.
Thank you. Thank you to you both. This has been so encouraging and inspiring to hear from you both now. And such great advice. We're so appreciative of your time. And it was such a pleasure to see your book and your work. And I'm sure we'll be looking up more of it going forward. So thank you very much. I guess we can try applause on this. I guess
We're like a little. Reacting, like, woo.
we're very
Thought it was
grateful.
terrific. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you everyone for being here. Oh, good.
I'm glad she behaved.
Oh, it's not a Zoom session without a pet saying hi. And everyone here, thank you for being here. Thank you for connecting with us. Please do stay connected with the club via Slack and our newsletters. And if you want to connect with anyone you saw at the event today, just send me an email and we can do our best to connect people as I think it's important now more than ever to stay engaged. So we'll go ahead and sign off here, but thank you, and we hope everyone stays well and safe and stays inspired.
Likewise.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Stay safe.
Thanks for your time, guys.
Okay.